What is a simple way for you to test the mobility of your shoulder blades? Let's take a look at it in this video. I've been a physiologist for over 30 years at the time of this recording, and when we look at the biomechanical movement of the shoulder blades, this is an area that causes a lot of restrictions in regards to sports performance, as well as, unfortunately, the genesis of a lot of cranial headaches. So if you deal with headaches, this video is going to help you alleviate those. And for anybody who's using their shoulders, which is everybody that's an athlete, I want to show you a couple things that you can do on your own to help assess how tight, how much mobility do you have, and what exactly can you do to get them to actually let go. When it comes to assessing the shoulders, one of the easiest ways that you can do this is literally intertwine your hands together like this. Put your hands over your head. And for some of you, just getting your hands over your head is going to be quite difficult. So please don't, end up popping or straining something. But if you can get your hands over your head, see if you can get straight up in line with your spine. And then what I want you to do is I want you to slowly try to pull your biceps up against your ears. Now, I'm doing this very, very slowly for the sake of the video. Some of you may be able to move much quicker than me. Some of you may not have that amount of mobility whatsoever. It's not about trying to see who does or doesn't have the flexibility. It's just a very easy self-assessment test that you can do. Now, if you take this in stages, for some of us, just getting our hands up above our head, we may find that the shoulder blades don't want to rotate. If you have somebody stand in front of you and they roll their shoulders forward, you can actually see the shoulder blade, the scapula. You can see its mobility as you roll the shoulders forward. You can see the shoulder blade pushing up against and exposing itself against the skin. Now, use your spine as a reference point. You have muscles called the rhomboids that reside from the spine going into the shoulder blade, the scapula. Those muscles are called the rhomboids, and they're responsible for pulling the shoulder blades backwards. Now, one of the things that people have a tendency to forget about is that every muscle has a counter muscle. The body's designed in a way that it has a counter muscle, usually from front to back, left to right, top and bottom. Some configuration of that, way beyond the scope of this video. So when you're moving your hands up over your head, we're sitting here talking about the biomechanics associated with the shoulder blades. Well, what happens if the shoulder blades won't move upward? That could be because your lower lumbar, the lower part of Latissimus Dorsi, that big, large muscle that makes up the underneath your lats and go down into the top of your pelvic girdle. If that muscle has a lot of tension in it, it's not going to want to allow that scapula to move up. If the rhomboids in between the shoulder blades are super tight, they want to draw them inward. It's hard for the shoulder blades to move up. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. Stop and think about it. For you just to be able to start to move your hands over your head, the shoulder blade has to start to move up, and it just continues up, no pun intended, all the way up that spectrum until it reaches its maximum range of motion. If you have optimized biomechanics, you should be able to get that hand all the way above your head. You should be able to get your bicep against your shoulder, and against your ear, and you should be able to do that for both, and then you should be able to squeeze them together and hold it. That's discussing how the shoulder is supposed to move. This is where we'll tie into, if you unfortunately have real bad headaches, the muscles that reside on the top of the shoulder, levator, scapula, they'll insert up against the hairline in the back of your neck. So believe it or not, if these muscles are tight, sometimes you won't even be able to get the shoulder blades to move upward because the scapula is actually running into a bumper, very, very tight muscle tissue. Now imagine if my muscles in the lower back are tight and then the muscles at the top are all gummed up, the shoulder blades aren't going to move. The reason why you would end up with a headache is because these muscles are so tight. As they pull back on the base of your hairline, it pulls that soft tissue over your scalp. You end up with the headaches behind your eyes. So we've talked about the idea that your shoulders should be able to move with relatively little to no restriction. We've talked about the idea that there's certain muscle groups that if they're tight are going to cause those scapular bones not to move. Well, remember when I said earlier that the body has a left and a right, a top and a bottom, a front and a back? Well, a lot of times if we get to where the shoulder is immobilized, what we're trying to figure out is, are my chest muscles, pec minor and pec major, they go and they insert at the front of the shoulder, are those so tight that maybe I can't get my arm up and over my head? Because you got to remember, the arm, the head of the humerus, comes into this shoulder joint. You've got muscles on the front, pec major and minor. You have teres minor and major underneath your armpit. You have the insertion of Latissimus Dorsi. Please don't get overwhelmed with the anatomy. I want you to become a student as to why do you have headaches and or why do you have shoulder restriction. So now we've discussed the idea that you have muscles on both the front and the back. We talked about the idea that how would we measure shoulder mobility? Well, what if you've run into some restrictions? Well, let's keep it very, very simple. Let's start from the back of your head and let's go down into the top of your pelvis. Right up against the base of your skull, remember we talked about where that hairline is at? You can literally lay down on a foam roller, just put the foam roller right across the back of your skull there, and literally just rotate your head left and right. You don't have to smash, just let the weight of the head kind of put some direct pressure, and you're probably gonna feel some hot spots. Well, that's one end of the muscle, right? It inserts up against the base of your skull. The other end is gonna insert up in the top of your shoulders, levator, scapula, upper trapezius, etc. So now what we would want to do is, and again, I'm just throwing these into a random, you may or may not have these resources. If you do, use them. If you don't, we can implement it with something else. Next thing I would look at is a theracane. If you use a theracane, you can get into these upper trapezius muscles very, very easily. You've got that little ball at the end of it. You're able to just press, you press down, and you're just putting direct pressure into the belly of the muscle. But what you're doing is you're trying to run the entire length of the muscle. So I would start with upper traps. Now you could take that theracane and you can loop it around and you can get in between the spine and the scapula. That's called the vertebral border of the scapula. Just feel where you can find some trigger points, some hot spots in there. When you find it, hang out and then roll your shoulder forward ever so gently. What you're trying to do is address any trigger points that may be around the scapula. Remember, today's conversation is getting mobility around the scapula itself. So we start with the upper traps. We go into the vertebral border of the scapula. Now you could take that theracane and you could hook it underneath the bottom of the shoulder, the scapula, right? Your shoulder blade there. And again, feel for some hot spots. You can then move that theracane down into the small of your back. Now, let's say that you don't have a theracane. It's a little bit of a contortionist type of a routine here, but you can get a lacrosse ball, a tennis ball, a golf ball laying on the ground. You can get that pinched into that upper trap area while laying on the ground. You can get that ball in between the vertebral border and the spine, and you can work the rhomboids. You could take a big foam roller and you can work the muscles on either side of the spine. Now, one of the things you've got to be very careful of is a lot of times people will lay directly across the foam roller, so it's running this way, and you run the risk of breaking the spinous processes on the top, okay? So the idea here is think about why the shoulder's not moving. How do you evaluate it? And then once you feel the tightness, then go after it with trigger point, foam rolling type of devices. Once you're able to get in there and start interrupting those pain, spasm, pain cycles, kind of think about that as an endless loop. That's what direct pressure is going to do, is it's going to interrupt that pain, spasm, pain. Now what you've done is you've taken the tension out of the tissue. The shoulder blade will now be able to go through its normal range of motion with less and less restriction. Now you're going to have better sport-specific biomechanics as well as offset any potential headaches associated with tight upper shoulder muscles. I hope this video has helped clarify what actually is shoulder mobility. How do you identify it? Well, you've now got a simple way that you can stand in front of a mirror and you can evaluate, can I get my hands up over my head? Can I get my biceps up against my ears? Feel for the tightness in the scapula anywhere around it, and then start implementing the foam roller and the trigger point therapy with a Theracane, a lacrosse ball, a tennis ball, anything that's going to fit the area in a way that you're comfortable with. If you happen to have any questions about this or any video I've ever put out, I hope you'll take the time and drop me an email, contact@coachrobb.com. And if you're new, thank you so much for stopping by. The numbers continue to grow quite a bit month over month, and I want to thank you for that. But if you're new, please like and subscribe, because we do answer a question every day here on YouTube. And with that being said, we look forward to seeing you tomorrow.